Hey friends, Mike and Jess here.
And welcome to Regeneration Nation TV. Today we are reacting to a video titled British Numbers Confuse Americans. This is from Numberphile. Numberphile? Numberphile. I'm going to say Numberphile. Be ready for us to have a lot of confusion on our faces.
Right.
I'm just warning you.
Yeah, math is not my best subject.
I can do math. The whole number system, numeric system from the UK to here is completely different, and I know that it's going to be super confusing to my brain, and I'm not very good with conversions or anything like that. So yeah, I'm gonna be
a lot of confusion.
confused.
Prepare for that. Yeah, I mean, it could just be numbers confuse Americans. It would still be true with me. So yeah, this is going to be so much fun.
The maths.
We've got links for this video down below. Go check it out. And yeah, let's get into this.
Let's do it.
I am from upstate New York.
I'm from downstate New York.
I live now in Brighton, England.
And I live in London now.
So how long have you been in the UK?
13 years.
So I've been living here for 10 years, and I've spent a lot of that time working as a physics teacher in secondary schools.
So if you're giving somebody your phone number, your credit card number, and you've got two numbers in a row that are the same, so my number is 8844 in my office. The British way to say that would be 8844. And it would have never occurred to me to say it that way.
I don't know about Americans in general, but I can say that for me, when I moved to London, I was really thrown by the double numbers thing for quite a while.
I would say 8844. I might say 8844, but I wouldn't say 8844.
When I moved here, there were two problems. Right? One is the double numbers thing. And the second thing is that people say the telephone numbers in a different pattern than they do US numbers. So it was that different pattern plus people saying things like 5599. I had such a hard time getting those numbers the first time. And maybe I'm just particularly slow.
But the thing that always trips me up is I don't know whether to say triple when I get three of those things in a row. So if I had a credit card that had 3 zeros in a row, do I say 000? Do I say 000? Do I say 000? Do I say 000? I don't know what to say. I'd love to hear from British people and some instruction on how to use my credit card number.
Off the top of my...
I mean, you would think I guess it just won't come up right then.
Yeah, because
if it came up a few times with the double, I'd be like asking. I would ask.
000 or 000. Like what?
Quadruple 4. I like, how far do we go with it?
Yeah,
British people and some instruction on how to read my credit card number.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of having ever heard triple, but I wouldn't rule it out. I don't actually know. Perhaps your commenters can let us know if they say triple.
Another example is what happens when you use numbers in the thousands or numbers with 4 digits. The president's address, that's called 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in American, and I think most British people would be comfortable with that being 1600. But when you get to a bigger number, Americans are happy to say that as 5300. A British person would probably call this 5300. Yeah.
Where I grew up on downstate New York, pretty much everybody around me would say 5300. Like, for example, I know that my parents will say 5300. But for me as a kid, I always found that a confusing way to phrase that. There's something about it that just doesn't gel in my mind. And honestly, it took me years and years to really get that. And so in my mind, when I hear someone say something like 7200, I have to kind of think about it in terms of $100 bills, right? So again, if someone says like 5300, I have to visualize 53 $100 bills on a table. For me, I always consciously made an effort to say 5,300 instead of 5,300.
Which do you think...
Is it like that for you?
It was
Because
for a long time. I was just going to say that.
Not to that extent to where I have to visualize.
Now it's, especially working with money, it's easier for me to do that and just say 5,300 when I see something that has 2 zeros after it. It's easy for me to say that. But before, like maybe like out of high school, maybe a little bit after I was 18, I learned to say 5,300, like 5,300 as 5,300. So I didn't learn it all through school. Like it was 5,300 all through school for me. But then when I got out and I started getting a job and like working and doing, I don't know when it like transferred in my brain, but then it started getting easier and that's when I started calling it. But I remember that one point where I was like, that's weird that people are saying that. What does that mean? You have to like think about it for a second. I'm like 5,300, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, it's still confusing.
Dang.
I think is more elegant, 5,300 or 5,300?
Well, 5,300 is easier to understand. I mean, when I
Yeah.
say 5,300, I get confused myself whether I mean 5,300 or 53,000.
Even though I think that
Yeah.
5,300 is linguistically nicer, right? It sort of rolls off the tongue more easily. But I like the precision in saying 5,300. But
Yeah, I
I was
think that's
definitely
more
going against the
specific.
tide of people that I lived around.
Nevertheless, I find it easy to say 50. When I'm thinking of numbers, when I want to say how much something cost.
You deal with $100 bills in America. Like, it's not rare to come across $100 bills, whereas I don't think there are, now I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think that there are 100-pound notes that are actually produced. I think it stops at 50. And I have only incredibly rarely in my life ever seen someone actually use a 50-pound note. And it's always remarkable. Like at a bank, I'll see someone pull out a 50. So maybe that's why, as an American, it's easier to think in terms of amounts of $100 bills, right? I have 12 $100 bills, so that's 1,200. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but that might be why
That's
British people are
crazy.
not as comfortable with that kind of phrasing.
The second year
Yeah.
is
I've never broken it down in my head like he's talking about.
I mean, living in two different places and knowing other people's experience would probably help me come to that conclusion. But yeah, that makes sense, especially
Yeah.
if it's more rare to see $100 notes. They don't have 100-pound notes if they don't
Yeah.
have them
I didn't
out
know that either.
like we do.
They might even. He doesn't know for sure.
2000s was 2001 for in American speech generally. But in British speech, that sounds weird. That sounds American. You'd say 2001. So 2001, 2001.
This is one of those
Okay.
cases where, having lived in London for 10 years, and in particular having taught in front of classes and being very used to speaking to British people all the time, I can sometimes kind of forget these little phrases and which way have I always said it, and just naturally thinking about it, the 2001 or 2001, which way would I have said it when I was in New York? I'm not 100% sure. I think I would have said 2001, but it's one of those things that gets kind of lost when you move from one country to another. Sometimes those little things can just kind of, you just become uncertain about how it was, and then you feel like a crazy person, right? You feel like I should know
hear
how I
him on
used to
that
say
one.
things, but you just lose it.
Because
but I did
when you
look
think
up.
about it for like the year, like we say 2025. But if I'm telling you the price of something, I think I would say it $2,025, like $2,025. But then I say 2025 for the year, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No,
Because
you're right.
when I'm saying it in like a monetary value, I will say but I
Yeah.
don't do that for like the year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm trying to
Didn't
think
know
if I
how I
actually
used-
do that or not, or if I'm crazy.
to say things, but you just lose it. But I did look up after you mentioned that the 2001. I wanted to see how Arthur C. Clarke actually says that number.
Of course, 2001.
He is British, and he says in interviews, he says 2001 as the title for his book is the way he always phrased it. I tried to find some audio of Stanley Kubrick saying the title of the movie, but he's an incredibly secretive kind of guy and didn't do very many interviews about it, and so I was unable to find any clip of Stanley Kubrick actually speaking aloud the name of perhaps his most famous movie.
If you want to count out seconds, which people sometimes need to do, a typical way of doing this is to have a word that you put in between your numbers to make it long enough that you've got a full second between the two numbers. And the typical way to do this in American English, or atypical way to do it, is to use the word Mississippi. So
Yeah.
1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi.
4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, 6 Mississippi.
Hopefully it's
Yep.
about a second. I've never actually tested it.
Yeah,
I have
right.
no idea where it comes from, except that
don't know where it
it's a
came
fun
from
word
either.
to say, and it's long. So that seems like an obvious choice to go in the middle.
Another way to do it is 1 1000, 2 1000, which you'll notice has a different number of syllables. The 1 1000, 2 1000, I think is found in both America and Britain. But then in Britain, you've got other ones like 1 Piccadilly, 2 Piccadilly, 3 Piccadilly,
Ooh,
or
I
1
like that. That's
elephant,
fun.
2 elephant, 3 elephant.
I was trying
Oh,
to
wow.
think about this,
One
and I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to hear any of my students count in this kind of way that you would do, where you're intentionally doing seconds. So I don't know what any of them would have said, but you asking me about this is basically the first time I've ever heard about Piccadilly or elephant.
When I said
Wow.
1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, that's how I learned it, with that very specific sing-song kind of rhythm to help you count out the seconds. And because I've only done this on the blog, I've not actually heard people say 1 Piccadilly, 2 Piccadilly. I'm not quite sure how they're singing it.
Piccadilly, I think, is okay. It has that same kind of rhythm as Mississippi, right? So 1
Yeah,
Mississippi,
elephant,
2
no, though.
Piccadilly, 3
Yeah, elephant would throw me off.
Like, elephant does not work. I don't think that works at all. I mean, 1 elephant, 2 elephant. It's so clunky. It's no good at all.
It
I have
is,
to
yeah.
answer that one. But
I
Piccadilly,
agree, man.
Piccadilly seems incredibly similar
Piccadilly
to
is
Mississippi.
just
so
really
I'm
fun
perfectly
to
happy with
say.
that as a
1
difference.
Piccadilly,
But it's also the
2
kind of thing that I've
Piccadilly.
found people have family versions of that aren't used anywhere outside their extended family. So there's room for lots of variation.
We want to hear what word you put in between numbers when you count to make sure there's a second spacing. So put comments under the video. Mississippi, elephant, Piccadilly, 1,000, something different. We want to know.
Mississippi
People
1,000.
often ask me or express astonishment when they get American addresses that they need to send something to, and the address might be 4 or 5 digit long, the number before the street. So, to live at 2,787 Main Street or something like that. Whereas, the last place I lived here was number 7, and my mother always found that strange. She often
Yeah.
wrote it as 70. She just couldn't imagine that I really
It needs
lived
to
at a
have
place
another
that was
number.
only number 7 in the great scheme of things.
It's funny because I never really tuned into the low house numbers thing. I mean, now that you have mentioned it, it seems incredibly obvious. And yes, I can think of a bunch of addresses in my life here that were low numbers. And it's definitely the case, well, at least it's the case in New York growing up, that I don't think there was ever a house number that was less than 100. So I
Yeah.
knew people who
I
lived
haven't.
in 100 or 107 or 109 houses. But I don't think there was ever a single address that was below that number.
Where I'm from,
No.
Not at
you
all.
never have a single digit. You rarely have a 2-digit street address. So my family is on the first block of Miller Street, and the first number is 100. Well, it's about the grid road system in America. In England, you don't talk about blocks the same way you do in America, because the roads are all higgledy-piggledy and don't necessarily make nice squares. But since American ones typically do make nice squares, what you want in this system is to have the numbers all match within each block. You talk about the 100 block of Miller Street. Once you cross the road that intersects with Miller Street and go on to the next block, it'll be the 200 block. So my block of my street where I grew up goes up to 131, and then it starts over at 200 once you cross the road.
So your numbers
wow.
get higher, quicker.
Yeah.
It is
I
almost
never
unbelievable to me
broke that down.
the numbers on one side of the street don't have anything to do with the numbers on the other side of the street. And I still come across this, and it's just appalling, right? That you're walking across the street, and the numbers on one side are going, 3, 5, 7, 9, and you look across the other side of the street, and the numbers will be 50, 48, 46, right? They're even, they're not aligned, and they're going in the opposite direction, and it's just maddening. I
Yeah,
don't
that's-
understand how this
Is he
came
talking
to
about
be, why anybody has let it stand
where
for as
he's
long as
living?
it has.
It's got to be.
It is just baffling to me. And the first few times that I ran across this, that I didn't realize, like, you have to check the numbers on the other side of the street, I got severely lost in London a couple of times trying to
Oh,
find
yeah.
places, because I'm walking down very long streets in the completely opposite direction, thinking, oh, I'll just cross the street when I need those even numbers, right? And then you get to wherever you're supposed to be, you cross the street, and you're hundreds off from wherever you were actually
Yeah,
trying to get,
that
but
would
you're
be
still on the same street.
crazy.
Right.
It's, like I said, it's just unbelievable to me. It's like I refuse to believe that humans ever decided to do this, right, on purpose. This isn't exactly number related, but I can tell you The thing that I did notice that I find is just charming is the habit of naming buildings houses, right? So even like a giant office building will sometimes have the name, and it'll be like 70 Darwin House. But this house suffix or this house label for like big corporate buildings or just council flats, I find is kind of remarkable and very charming in and of itself. And that strikes me as being very British.
It's
where
very,
someone could say,
it's
oh,
a posh
I've never
thing. Like,
heard
I'm
of
going
that.
to Darwin House. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it's just like a building that you work at. But it's the Darwin House.
Yeah, I
I
like it
live
though.
at
very fancy.
50 Feynman House, and but 50 Feynman House is a gigantic tower block, right? It's
Yeah.
not like a little cottage like it sounds. So I do quite like that. I love to explore the
that's
city
lovely.
and just kind of wander around, and there's always a ton of construction going on, and in particular in the past few years and right now there's a bunch of big luxury buildings going up or that have been recently constructed. And I can't help but notice that all of them want to be number one at whatever they are, right? So for example, there's one London Bridge, and there's one Blackfriars, there's one Tower Bridge, right? And these are luxury buildings. And they always write it like really big on the sign, right? It'll say one Blackfriars. And the other thing that I can't help but notice is they always like to write out the one, right? It's O-N-E. It's never the number one. I find that interesting. I assume that somewhere some architecture firm decided that this is a kind of luxury statement. I'd be curious to know if this happens elsewhere in the world because, as we discussed, I don't think that it can happen in New York because the buildings can't start at 1, right? They have to start at 100.
Yeah, right.
But I've noticed that some of these buildings that label themselves as 1 whatever, they're in like suspicious spots where I look around and I think, I'm not sure that you can really claim that you are 1 Tower Bridge, right? There are numerous buildings here, any of which looks like they could be number 1 Tower Bridge. So I have my doubts about the accuracy of this number system. Although, with the street numbers, who knows, right? The numbers don't have anything to do with anything, so they could just be all over the place.
I'm so lost.
This whole last part lost me, dude. I'm not gonna lie. The whole last part, I just didn't understand. I would need to know more about.
Just be there and be an experience with it.
Yeah, I need more context to understand that last
He
part.
just went on too long, and I'm just kind of like, I don't understand, but you understand because you're there right now. You're there.
It's like if it's 4790, number file drive, and there's a building there. It's like, how do I know you're really
400?
It's like, well, that's the address here, so that's how you know. Boom.
It is funny though because
I'm sure he has a good point, but
we would get lost. We would get lost if we tried to go and do our own thing and try to just cruise around, London, and just like walk around and see the buildings and like try to find something. We would get lost for sure because yes, we would. I'm saying we'd have to look for directions at first because of the number system. If you're trying to find a building like that,
I got my smartphone.
Well, I'm saying without trying to do that, if we were just cruising around and we were just like walking and just discovering. Which we wouldn't do that because we were dependent on our smartphones anyway.
I'm
it's
dependent.
Just a hypothetical situation.
I'm very dependent,
okay.
and it's reliable, okay?
But yeah, everywhere
leave
you
me
go
alone.
here, it's so normal for me to be, this is the even side, this is the odd side. Like, we're on the odd side of the street, so all the numbers are going to be odd. And then you go across the street, it's all even. So it's like, this is going to be this number. This number should be next. Even though it's a little bit weird in our neighborhood, though, because I feel like they're like 3 numbers apart. Because our neighbors are like 3 numbers apart from us. They're not directly
for the most part, it's going to be like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It goes with each other, even and odd on both sides. But I don't know. I'm sure most people know that.
Yeah.
I don't know. This video is a lot. There was some stuff that I knew in it, but then most of it I didn't.
Yeah.
And then the last
about
part
the differences
just
you mean, or
confused me.
like just that one just confused me because it's just totally different. But yeah, how do you guys say 5,300? Like, do you say 5,300? Is that a normal thing to you? Do you say 5,300? I think it does make more sense to say 5,300. It's very precise. It's very exact. You
Because
don't have
then
to
if
think
there's
about that
34
number.
on there, like, you don't have to change it.
Yeah.
5,334.
You're right, because then you go to 5,334. But I actually have to think about that before I say it. Like, it's a lot.
I wouldn't say it like that. I would never say 5,334. Yeah. No.
Yeah, I don't know. That's not normal to me, for me to say that. I would definitely say definitely.
I'm not going to be able to call anything like hundreds, like 5,300, without thinking of 53 individual $100 bills now.
Yeah.
This video changed my whole life. Wow.
It's a very interesting style of video as well. Like, they had the interview with the woman in person, but then they had the guy and he was just an animation. I wonder why that was. I wonder if that's just the way that they choose to film their videos, just a unique style, or if that guy just didn't want to be on camera. She's
I don't know.
I don't want to be on
Either
camera.
way, I liked it. It was very unique, and
was.
I dug it.
It made it very interesting, for sure.
Yeah. Hopefully you dug it as well. Thank you so much for watching with us. And we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, friends.
Peace.
I'm not scared of your love.